And we are really excited to have you here at Biola. My name is Paul Spears. I am the director of the Torrey Honors Institute, here with my esteemed colleagues. And Torrey is about the great conversations. We love to talk. Our classes are driven dialectically. We are pursuing conversation. We are pursuing writing well. We are pursuing thinking hard. And we are pursuing the good, the true, and the beautiful, and that is Jesus himself. You're going to see some of the stuff that we do in classes. We don't have 5 faculty members all lined up in a row for a class, which would be mildly daunting for especially freshman students. It would be fun, but they would be scared. But we are going to do a conversation. We are actually going to be sitting around and talking about a book that we love. As a matter of fact, I kind of wish we had recorded the conversation that we had as we were prepping together for this time with y'all. Because it was really fun, and it reminded me of how much fun it is to work with our faculty, and that is a general tenor. Our faculty love to work with one another. We are different in the sense that we also are all specialists of a different sort. So my specialty is philosophy of education philosophy, and I'm going to have every faculty member introduce themselves and tell you their name and let you know their specialty.
All right, my name is Adam Johnson. I'm a theologian. I'm also from Seattle, so I'm sorry for the gentleman wearing the Broncos hat. This year's another matter.
Yeah. I know she didn't bring that up.
And yeah, that'll do for now.
Would you say what you study?
So systematic theology, doctrine of the atonement. So.
My name is Jenson. I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, so I'm not supposed to like the guy in the Broncos hat. Actually,
The guy in the Broncos is going, I wore a hat.
I
And you're
know.
gonna
So
just give me,
sorry.
what is this all about?
I do systematic theology too, and I kind of jump around, but I started on sin and moved to the church, and
That's a good thing.
yeah.
We don't want your conversion story.
Yeah, your discipline.
Yeah, that's what I do.
My name's Melissa Schubert. My niece the other day was wearing her Seahawks t-shirt. She's 6 years old. I was explaining to her that I am just not a fan of football at all. And she said, is that because you work all the time? So there's that.
Again, I don't know what that means, but
Anyway, and my academic specialization is English, literature, Shakespeare, Spencer, Milton, those 16th, 17th century poets.
I'm Fred Sanders. I'm a systematic theologian. Work on the doctrine of the Trinity is kind of my specialty. I'm also an amateur historian of Biola, so local folklore.
so Fred, why don't you go ahead and just, he has the PowerPoint or
I'm
Prezi,
bragging.
and therefore he has the power, so he's going to start class for us.
All right. The other thing I was thinking about, if we ever had 5 tutors in a session, students would be intimidated, of course, but they also couldn't get a word in edgewise because we're just going to talk a lot, which is interesting because I taught 4 sessions this week, and several times I had out-of-body experiences during those 3-hour-long sessions where I thought, I haven't talked for a long time. I just keep asking students questions, and then they go for 20 minutes. And even if students say something really interesting and I really want to get in there and get a piece of that argument, I think, wow, I'm growing in my self-control. Look at me not talking. Right? Anyway, that's all over. We're just going to talk at you for a couple hours. We're talking about The Magician's Nephew, which is one of the Chronicles of Narnia. We wanted to pick a text that was really friendly and accessible, and that most people coming to a Biola weekend kind of event have probably read, but not necessarily. So we'll do a little bit of recapping. But the idea is we're all Narnians here, so most of us are going to kind of be able to follow along. And specifically, we're going to try to look at a couple of major themes that come up in The Magician's Nephew and kind of kick those around a little bit and try to understand what Lewis is teaching us, because these are books that teach us, books we can learn a lot of really profound things from. Lewis packed a lot into them, even though they're also entertaining. And so if you read them just at the level of, I shouldn't even say just, if you read them at the level of, wow, this is a great story, what a great imagination, how gripping it is to get into the minds of these characters, that is not an inappropriate read. That's in some ways the right way to engage the text. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in here, but I think of what Lewis says about how to read The Fairy Queen, that great Elizabethan epic poem that goes on and on and on. he says, oh, okay, you want to learn to read the Fairy Queen, right? Here's what you do. Start when you're 11 on a rainy day with a large illustrated edition and a lot of peace and quiet, and sit there and read it without understanding any of the deep stuff, just being entranced by the story. Then later, come back after much advanced study and read it deeper. Right? But you can't really get that far in your more advanced study if you haven't had that sort of childlike experience of being captivated and enraptured by it. The first time I read that, I hadn't really read Fairy Queen well at all, and certainly not when I was 11 on a rainy day. So I thought, wow.
Sunny.
It was definitely sunny, yeah.
California.
Southern California. That's right. It was always a sunny day. So I thought, oh, I'm at a disadvantage now because all I can bring is my scholarly expertise as a grown-up who thinks critically. Dang. It's too late for me to go back and recapture how I should have first engaged this book. So we're not trying to set aside that. It's just that if you read it at the level of entertaining fairy tale, there's not a lot to say about it besides, wasn't that great? That was great. And we've got like 2 hours.
And we could also say, we could read that passage and just say that was great.
Yeah, yeah. So that would be one way to discuss it. I'm having slight technical difficulties here. But if you can see that, this is one of Pauline Baines's illustrations for the original edition, because it's been colorized now, of The Magician's Nephew. And if you can see Diggory, yeah, you can't really dim the screen light without putting us completely in the shadow, Paul.
Oh, we can't?
No, I already tried it.
Oh,
Really.
I never-
Yeah, people won't know who's talking to
So
them.
much by subtly sliding
Yeah,
down,
yeah, but
and now I'll suddenly slide back in.
They'll see the pretty picture. They just won't know what the voices are
They won't
coming.
see the pretty faces.
That's right.
I was thinking of Fred as well.
So you can see Diggory Kirk standing there, and it might be a little harder to pick Polly. What's Polly's last name? She's asleep there in the background. They are in the wood between the worlds, which is this crucial,
Plumber.
Polly Plumber, thank you, which is this crucial junction area, in between worlds. It's a portal place where each of the little ponds takes you to another entire self-contained place. I want to talk, before we get into that, just raise the issue, and this is the fun thing that we had part of a fight about and decided we needed to stop fighting and wait till we had an audience and then fight in public. The Magician's Nephew raises the question for Narnia readers, where should you start in reading Narnia? So the order of publication is, as you see here, it starts with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Magician's Nephew is number 6 of the 7.
Not here.
That's right. Well, I do have that on the Prezi. Or this is the HarperCollins edition, and you can see, if you can make that out, that they are numbered on the spine, such that you should read them apparently in the order 2, 4, 5, 6, 3, 1, 7. I don't know. They're somebody's library editions, right? So when you read them, starting with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then of course through to The Last Battle, which is uncontroversially the last book. That you experience in a certain way, but as you can see here, The Magician's Nephew has the big number 1 on the spine in this HarperCollins printing, suggesting that you should begin reading with The Magician's Nephew. Now, I have a strong position on this, which I refer to as the right position, but I wonder what everybody else thinks.
Gee, Fred, you make it so open to really engage on this.
That's derived from Jerome Wright's scholarly opinion, right? Which is, of course, incorrect. I mean, how do you argue with the right opinion?
Well, that's why they wanted me to kick off. I think it is important. Yeah, yeah. So the reason, I'll just start. Look, can anyone make a case for starting with The Magician's Nephew?
Because it's the creation story would be the place I would start.
There you go. Starts in the beginning, so.
The alternative ordering is to say read the books in order of chronological unfolding. So start with creation and then follow with each of the stories in a timeline from earliest to last events. And so the 7 books would be organized according to chronology beginning to end.
So that's the way, I mean, you could put it, you could say that's the way that things happen in the world. They happen in a relatively linear sequence. And so when you, for the sake of argument at least, you have this little boy named Diggory here who, by the time you get to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is a graying professor. And so this is the way the world works. We're born, we grow old, and and we die, and why not tell a story that begins with Diggory as a kid and only later moves to him as a professor?
And since you like systematic theology, we can begin with the doctrine of creation, moving on, following other doctrines.
In fact, since you like the Bible, that would be a good place.
Right, Christians are used to stories that are ordered. In the beginning, God made everything, and then here's what happened with everything. And so if you start with the magician's nephew, you get to this creation account at the end of the book.
And actually, in correspondence, there is this young boy that was writing, actually, C.S. Lewis, about what he thought the orders were when he actually argued for the magician's nephew being first. And Lewis didn't have a strong opinion when he responded back, like, no, it has to go in this order. So I think he's actually fine with either.
Yeah, artists don't always understand their own works that well.
Scholars do.
We enjoy each other's time, but we're not always this snarky.
It's Friday afternoon.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and there are, of course, it's great to see as you read The Magician's Nephew to get the origin story of Jadis and where she came from. You get her first world that she was in, and how she spread to other worlds and eventually to Narnia. So that by the time you get to, on this reading, book 6, you have this experience of, oh, she's back. This is evil from long ago that's been waiting somewhere out in the wilderness of Narnia. We had a sense of doom. We knew it would return. And here she is. Other thoughts?
Well, when we had started to talk about this, so I feel like the thought I had was one that was going to build on the case you made for reading in the order of publication.
So the order
So
of
her-
publication is you start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you get to the 6th book, Magician's Nephew, which then it's a flashback, right? You go back to, yeah, okay.
Sorry, I wasn't sure. Were we moving there?
Sure, yes.
Oh, okay. No, mine's too small, I thought. Go ahead and make your big case. I'll add my gloss.
For why the Narnia Chronicles should be read in the order, first Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, then the following books, and 6th, The Magician's Nephew. I think it's a matter of reader experience. When you read Magician's Nephew and you hear, when you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and you hear the forest people talking about how Aslan is on the move, Lewis describes for you the feeling that the Pevensey kids get when they think, I didn't know what an Aslan was, but I knew it was on the move, right? And I knew that the way they talked meant whatever this thing was of which I only had the name, this was going to change everything. If it's true that Aslan has been sighted and that he's on the move. And so there's an experience you're supposed to have there when you read it the first time, which you don't have if instead you go, yes, Aslan, I've been waiting for him because he's in every book. So there's an introduction to Aslan that I think is handled a certain way in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because Lewis wrote it first, published it first, and needed to set things up for you.
So the mysterious nature of it, even.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And well, and the way the expectations end up being overturned. So it's not just, so it's mysterious, but also being mysterious, we've got a whole panoply of expectations that many of which are challenged over the course of the book. And there's a parallel actually in Magician's Nephew, where Aslan says that an evil has already entered the world, and then all the newly created creatures are saying, oh no, what's an evil? N-E-E-V-I-L, what's an evil? And then when Uncle Andrew shows up, they think maybe he's the Nevil. And they know that they should pay attention to and beware of Nevils, whatever those are. And so you sort of see their experience of trying to comprehend what Aslan's talking about when they haven't experienced it yet. Probably a similar thing going on with our experience of Aslan and Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe.
And then also when you're reading Magician's Nephew, if you've already read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, then what you experience in reading Magician's Nephew is things falling into place, especially in the last couple chapters where Lewis just kind of gets in a hurry about it, like, oh, and then that's where this came from, and that's where this came from. And you have these aha moments of, oh, so the wardrobe works because they built it out of that wood. I get it. And oh, Diggory grows up to be, oh my gosh, that's where it all came from. And so that's the aha moment that I think the book is designed to give you.
Which, to build on, we had said earlier, one reason to start with a creation story is because, that's how the scriptures start for the people of God, right? We get our story of origins as the first part of the biblical witness to our situation, our creation, our redemption, etc. But it's worth noting that God revealed creation to people who were already inhabiting the world. And so things were already as they were, and God then speaks and gives to Moses a story that Moses couldn't possibly have known apart from divine self-revelation, because Moses wasn't present at creation, nor were any of the people of Israel to whom the words of God were spoken. So in that sense, the reader who has become acquainted with Narnia's story and is in the middle of things, the reader getting the creation story after they know what happens, is actually fairly similar to the experience of the recipients of divine self-revelation about things which precede.
So they have a context in which to understand.
You could say, who wrote Genesis? Mr. Exodus, right? It's the person who had come through the Red Sea, to whom in the beginning story was revealed and written down. So when you're starting with in the beginning in the creation story, you're getting it from the people who got the redemption story.
And who accomplished creation, it's the one who brought us out of Egypt. Yeah.
So is there some deeper point in terms of storytelling, or in terms of the Christian life or the gospel that's being made there, or is it just, well, I had this this image in my mind, I created a story, went on from there to write more stories? Is it circumstance that then shapes how we should read this particular set of texts, or is it a deep underlying strategy that informs something more about literature, how we should make, if we're going to make a movie trilogy, should we start in the middle and then work back?
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Is there something?
I think it's at least got to be the fact that we needn't think that origins tell us the most or the most significant things about something. So I mean, that's at least got to be the case. So sometimes we tend to think, as long as I know where something comes from, I know the secret to that thing. And I mean, the Magician's Nephew itself suggests that no, what we really need to know is what things are for. So there, we need to know where things are headed. So again and again and again, where Uncle Andrew and Jadis are wrong is that they reduce things and persons to their kind of their immediate instrumental purposes. So they miss what things are for, thinking they're only for them. I mean, I think at the very least, it's got to be the case that there are different places in the story that can reveal the meaning of the story. It could be the origin of the story. Think how significant and revelatory death is for people, so it can be the end of a story. There could be a moment in a story that's a profound, it's either a moment of profound transition or just such a strikingly paradigmatic moment for someone. So in one sense, it's not claiming that much, but at least it's to say the origins alone aren't enough.
Go ahead.
I'm just aware, as I think about your question, Adam, I think it is a deep part of the literary tradition to start stories in the middle, and
Midway through this life, we're bound upon.
Famously, the epic tradition has a whole trope of being in the middle of things that started with the first epic we know of, Homer's. But I think so you could just say, well, that was a piece of the tradition, and so stories continue to be like that. I think where it bears upon why, I think my answer for why might it be that really great stories have often started in the middle of things, I think it's because they resemble then our felt experience.
Yeah.
We are creatures who have to refer backwards and forwards. So our experience of being embedded in time is that in the present moment, we're always understanding it in relation to both its origin and its destination. So in that sense, I think it might be that a lot of good storytelling matches that felt experience, though I wouldn't want to make an exhaustive claim and say all good storytelling has to resonate with that part of the human experience.
Is it going too far to say it kind of recapitulates human experience of, at some point you become conscious of yourself as a young person. You go, who am I? I am who? Wow, this is me. And then you want to know like when you were born, and you get your origin story. And it gives a great backstory for who you are as an individual self, but you weren't there taking notes at the time
Right.
Like going,
Right.
this is important. I mean, gosh, the day of my birth, I better commit this to memory.
Here I am.
Later on, this is going to be really significant.
Right. We're not,
You find significance somewhere in the middle, and then you're glad for the origin story and even ancestor stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Why then do we start in the beginning?
In why does
Which in the
Which
beginning?
The
scripture?
Bible?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And it seems like it could have started. It could have reshaped it so that it starts with the Exodus and eventually works back. I mean, Tolkien's so brilliant. You enter this world and then gradually you get all the backstory for everything going on in the Lord of the Rings. So we start within the beginning in Genesis, at least as the Bible is currently organized. So what's with?
Yeah, even as the Pentateuch is organized, right? That's not a matter of, do the prophets come before what? That's like Genesis to Deuteronomy. That's a set. That's
Right.
We never found those separately and wondered what order they went in. Yeah. So here's what I think is going on in terms of the really profound thing that Lewis is working with here. I mean, the Bible does begin in the beginning, but it also re-begins in the beginning when you get to the Gospel of John, right? There's kind of a fight among, it's not a fight, it's there's a contest among the four gospel writers to decide how far back you have to start the story of Jesus. Because the apostles meet Jesus and come to understand who he is after the death and resurrection, and they say, oh, well, if that's who he is, this changes everything. So you can't just say, once upon a time I met this guy named Jesus. You have to go, I mean, it at least starts with the baptism of John in the wilderness, calling Israel to national repentance. You got to start there. That's Mark's idea, right? Well, and actually before that, you got to, because that was prophesied by Isaiah. So you got to start with Isaiah prophesying that John's coming. And then Matthew comes along and says, no, you got to do the genealogy, man. It goes back through David to Abraham. You got to start with Abraham to tell this Jesus story, because we've seen something here in the middle of history which resets the entire Bible story. And then Luke comes along and says, that's cute, Matthew. I like that genealogy. It goes to Abraham. I'm going to do one that goes to Adam. Anyone else think they can beat that with the next gospel? And then John comes along and says, yeah, gather around, children. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh, and that's who we met.
So
I mean, it
it's
really
at least
does.
a couple chapters earlier than Luke.
Yeah, that's
Adam,
right. Adam
son of
comes
God.
along later.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's going on. Redemption has a certain priority. Yeah.
So in the same way that the Bible has two beginnings, so in Genesis we start with creation, but then in John we go back before creation, and both are fully valid and interesting different ways of beginning the whole process. Narnia has these two different beginnings. Either of them is fully valid. You're not messed up for life if you've read Magician's Nephew first. There's the good news for you.
You were
Or
very
even if you think
relieved
you were
now.
right to do so, that's okay too.
But it is one of the questions about our condition is why in the world are we here in the first place? So that curiosity that we have about our own existence, I think, is played out through the original stories of Genesis. Like, what in the world is this world that we're on all about? And why in the world are we in the situation that we're in? And I think in some ways, the Magician's Nephew is doing the same thing. So what's Narnia all about? It's the kind of questions that we have when we exist in our own lives. And then we start to think about ourselves in context of something bigger. And I think that happens you have to develop that through a text. And so I'm actually coming down onto your side a little more, Fred. I'm shocked. But it is the sense that, that context pushes questions and then causes you to want to know more about who you are, what you are. And if you love a good book, which is one of the amazing things about the Narnia, is that you become invested in the characters. You're like, why are those things like they are? And then Lewis starts to answer them, and that brings what? Sort of intellectual relief, too.
I mean, curiosity's it's a really interesting double-edged kind of term here, because
Yeah.
on the one hand, I think there's this holy curiosity where we long to know more, and particularly about where we come from and where we're going. Imaginative depictions that don't claim any sort of direct purchase on fact, but still get at what it might have been like, are great ways to indulge or at least seek to begin to gratify that curiosity. But curiosity is also it's certainly one of the main problems
Yeah.
of the book here.
Yeah,
The book begins in curiosity to bored kids in the summer vacation when they're not going to the beach. It's precisely because they're sort of venturing into areas that maybe they shouldn't venture, they get in trouble in the first place. Uncle Andrew is the amateurish magician whose sort of proud curiosity leads him into realms where he's dealing with power he doesn't know how to begin to deal with. Of course, we can circle back to the Garden of Eden and the garden that's on top of the cliffs in the book here, where curiosity plays a big role again. So I mean, it's really tricky, kind of back and forth. But
I'm sure we'll keep talking about this. I'm so
that's
I'm
all
so
I got.
curious
That's
if
all I
those
got.
all count as. Oh, I didn't mean to
Incidents
say
of
curious.
curiosity?
I didn't mean to say curious. I'm finding myself resisting the
Okay, what?
description of all of those things as being a problematic form of curiosity.
oh no, I mean I think they're all forms of curiosity. And
Okay.
when I was saying that there's a double-edged kind of blade here, and frankly,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we don't know if curiosity is good or bad. I mean, we really honestly, is this a holy longing to know more, or is it a prying into God's
Or an attempt to
secrets?
control.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What do you think? I don't know what you think.
We gotta do this part.
Object.
Do you want to, let's do, I put the table of contents up. So, and Matt, you had started kind of describing the flow, just the structure of the book, 15 chapters. We can break it up by location. First two are in London. We meet the two kids. Yeah. Then we end up in Charn and meet Jadis and understand how she has brought total destruction on this entire other world. Do we want to say anything else about the traveling between the worlds before we move on to other locations?
There's this wood between the worlds, they decide to call it, which is a place of significant peace and quiet and stillness. There's a forgetfulness that marks it, and it does seem to highlight even more than just getting to another world would. It highlights this basic scheme that Lewis is operating with, which is the what if there are other worlds, and so so sort of even more acutely than just walking into a wardrobe and finding yourself in Narnia. The wood between the worlds
Yeah.
is an iconic consideration that there might be behind any, there might be numerous other worlds. So the Magician's Nephew, that's the first place that we find that out. Until the Magician's Nephew, we think there's our world and there's Narnia. And then, yeah, it's worth
And you go
saying.
straight from our world to Narnia.
Mhm.
In fact, the wardrobe is it even a place? It's like 1 minute it's got fur coats, the next minute they're kind of bumping into pine needles,
Right,
and it's colder.
right,
You couldn't really describe the interior of the wardrobe as a place worth talking about.
right.
It's not in our world or the other world. It
Right.
kind of
So it is,
fluctuates.
and it's made from some wood
Narnian
from
wood.
another world, but not from the wood between the worlds.
Right.
Exactly.
So I was going to ask, when we decided we'd outline this by location, I had to leave chapter 3 out
Yeah.
of the outline by location because I'm not sure the wood between the worlds is a place.
Okay, and that makes sense. There's there's a line when the cabbie's wife, I can't remember her name, but she
becomes Helen.
she might have been named Helen, Queen Helen. She might have already
So
been-
wait, do I hear?
No, she's something else. Is that?
Okay. So
Nice job,
she, the kids realize that she was drawn. Aslan just brings her into Narnia, and the kids realize she was drawn, and they say, like a bird to its nest. That's the image given there. So it suggests that these in-between places, it gives them less placedness. There's this, I don't know. I was thinking she can transition without going anywhere, and so then those transition places seem maybe like they're not exactly places. Though it's worth saying that Jadis finds the wood between the worlds intolerable, and in that sense, I'd wonder what it is about that place or not place that is suffocating for her, that pales her, that makes her unwell.
That's a good question because she's very weak there. And my guess, I don't think it says this in the text, my guess is she draws strength from a world, like in a like a leech, in a parasitic kind of way, right?
Right.
Sycophantic was not the
Although I mean, she and Andrew both, they're repulsed by good, and it seems to be on balance a good place, to use that in sort of a loose sense. I don't think it can be a place in a strong sense because there's so little sense of time. You have no idea how long you've been there. You've lost memories, so there's history kind of is lost in that place. But it certainly has a quality to it. It's got a good, life-giving, restful quality.
Nice place to nap.
Yeah.
To connect it to our previous conversation, it does seem like it seems like a place of innocence, sort of birth. Like you were saying, the infant doesn't take stock of here I am in my infancy, situated in any sense. It is brute fact that I am here and alive and present, and I was in utero before, but the infant is not even thinking that way. So it strikes me that it's unself-consciously, it doesn't have a before and after.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main thing. It doesn't have a before and after, and that's a way in which our previous conversation maybe sets us up to be puzzled by the word between the worlds.
So I know where.
Then Jadis makes her way to London, and there's a fight there, and then they get out of there into Narnia, and this is where you get really middle of the book, the creation story of Narnia being made by Aslan. Then there's a whole set of adventures, I guess you'd call it, connected to a temptation toward a fall, right? And in this new creation, there's a garden with a tree in it, and there's an evil tempter who is trying to provoke Diggory into sinning. So that's as much as I can describe as being like the Garden of Eden, because when you dig down in any detail, it's very different from the Garden of Eden.
How much is Charn replicating so before we get to creation, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens before creation, and all that stuff that's happening is happening in a different world, although at least one person from that world then joins or becomes a part of Narnia. How much is of that world before there's a creation intentionally repeating what's going on in terms of like Milton with the kingdom of God and the angels, some of which then are fall down and become part of our world. So there's the creations. There are events and there are worlds happening before the creation of our world. How much of that is going into a backstory that parallels some of those other stories, or is it just is there not that much being is there not that much intentionality behind it in terms of paralleling some of those ideas?
I'm looking at the way that Aslan explains Jadis's eating of the fruit. He says, if any Narnian, unbidden, had stolen an apple and planted it here to protect Narnia, it would have protected Narnia, but it would have done so by making Narnia into another strong and cruel empire like Charn, not the kindly land I meant it to be. And then he says, and the witch tempted you to do another thing, didn't she, son? Yes, and this is, yes, the witch tempts Diggory to bring home an apple to his mother to bring about her healing. And later, and Diggory realizes, well, that wouldn't have worked, right? And Aslan explains, yes, that wouldn't have worked. He says that would have been terrible for both of you. And then Diggory is giving up hope that his mother can have any healing. And Aslan says, that is what would have happened, child, with a stolen apple. It is not what will happen now. So, Adam, I think that these stories function a little differently than the way Milton is trying to account for what has actually happened in our world, because they turn out to be speculative about what could have happened. Charn seems to be a place that has entered its destruction. Narnia could have also become destroyed, but doesn't get destroyed in the same way. So there seemed to be the opening up of possibilities and not the analogy building that Milton does.
Isn't that similar though to the way that what was a heavenly city gets then mirrored in this perverse kingdom, the way you see early in Milton, and then
Yeah.
and then it's precisely the Lord of that kingdom that enters this new land and is the beachhead for evil entering it.
Right,
So that-
right.
Well, but partly we don't have any sense that Charn posted a contest between Aslan or his representatives and Jesus. So I think that's
Yeah.
part of the, you don't have that sort of
Uh-huh.
God versus Satan
Sure.
thing.
Genesis 3 tells us so little about a number of the things we're curious about, though
Curious.
about, that's right. Yeah.
Problematically.
But it sets it up in such a way that I think it lets you know it's way ahead of you on what it's telling, because it tells you about the tree of life, and I'm always frustrated every time I read Genesis 3 about the tree of life in the middle of the garden, which is kind of ignored for the rest of the story, right? Like, well, go back to the tree of life. Doesn't really show up again until Revelation.
Right.
You know. So it's odd that there's one tree at the middle of this garden that Lewis is setting up in parallel. But it's pretty easy to speculate that if Adam and Eve had not unlawfully eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, there's no stated command against eating of the tree of life.
Right.
The text doesn't tell us whether they ate of it all the time anyway, or if it was going to be their big party at the end, or if they had eaten of the tree of life first, then they could have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? It's not like God put a poison tree there. Knowledge of good and evil can be a good thing if lawfully had. So I think Lewis is pondering all of that pretty deeply when he says, let me try to retell this with one tree, which can have different results depending on how it is eaten. And then you're back in London for the end, and it really is just Lewis kind of saying, whoops, I've only got one chapter left. Let's wrap totally everything up and tell you.
Yeah, I got a
how this
deadline. My
relates."
publisher is wondering where the next book is.
Yeah. Actually, Melissa, you were just looking up the publication or the composition history of the
Yeah.
books?
Yeah, so it looks like in 1949, Lewis's friends start getting to read some chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And within that first year, where he's working on Narnia, he composed what they call now the La Fée fragment. Because Diggory's uncle says, we have that woman in our family, that ancestor, Mrs. La Fée, which just means fairy. She's a fairy godmother of theirs. So anyway, the La Fée fragment shows up right around the time he's composing. He's writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But he finishes all of the rest of the Chronicles of Narnia, including the last battle. So the last battle is completed in 1953 in writing, and he still has not settled on a final version of The Magician's Nephew. And it is the last of the Chronicles that he edits and submits for publication, though it is the penultimate in order of
Could this be
publication.
driving Tolkien mildly mad? In terms of the fact that there's not enough backstory going on, and Tolkien is always thinking, we were talking about this earlier, Tolkien wants more backstory, right? There's not enough backstory to make Tolkien happy. He'll write other books just to, do backstory. There are volumes of books that no one really wants, but because there are Tolkien people out there, they buy them by the truckload. Of all of his notes on Lord of the Rings, and all of the different ways in which he's opened and he's got backstory on backstory on backstory on construction on construction on construction, because he wants to know what all of the skeletal parts are that are holding that up together. And I don't think Lewis works like that. And as a matter of fact, probably drives literally Lewis to drink, which he was going to do anyway.
Yeah. Well, and also the fact that Tolkien's world that he creates has this really intoxicating completeness to it.
Did you do that because I said drink? And
Yeah.
You went intoxicated? Okay.
Wow.
Everyone who, I don't want to make exaggerated claims for him inventing the entire fantasy genre, but, there's a claim that can be made there, because everyone who reads that Tolkien stuff decides, wow, another world that really seems to have been developed all the way out, like languages. Oh my gosh, a madman did this, right? He composed languages, and then he wrote tracts of this in that language, and then he wasn't happy with it and wouldn't let anyone read it, so he said, oh, I shouldn't have written that part of the myth in High Elven. You know, I should write it in a lower form
In
of
the
elf speak.
vernacular.
Yeah, in the vernacular of one of the regions.
Common Elven.
Yeah. And when he gets it all built out, it's got this incredible integrity and interconnectedness. It's got generations of planning behind it that he's all kind of spun out in his mind. Parts of it are roughed in, I'm sure, but it gives the impression of nothing is roughed in. You know, all of it's designed all the way to the edges. Full bleed composition, we would say, right? There's no margin. It goes all the way out. Whereas Lewis, and you don't have any characters from anyone else's mythology running around in it. It's self-contained. It's hermetically sealed. Lewis, on the other hand, is going, well, LaFay, oh yeah, we should do some Arthur legend. We should just grab some Arthur legend and cram it into Narnia legend. Whatever. That would actually add something to it. Because who
Yeah.
doesn't love Arthur? Right? And that's the kind of thing that Tolkien would just, you know, bite the stem off his pipe over, I think.
There's a letter about the magician's nephew from his friend Roger Green, who says who really likes the final version of the magician's nephew, but he takes credit. He says, I think it's the best one. Good thing I talked Lewis out of that whole Piers the Plowman, which is a
Whoa.
Middle Ages English.
Really?
Yeah, he says, good thing I talked him into
Where was-
editing Piers the Plowman out of the magician's nephew. Now it's a really unified whole. So
Where was Piers Plowman going to
I
be?
don't know.
That's
So
great.
could you tell us
But
more
Roger
about-
Green? Oh, about Piers Plowman? No. I mean, is it a 14th century English
Yeah.
poem? Yeah, about a plowman.
Yeah.
It's about
So
a
do you think-
plowman.
Hence the name.
What's his
Big
name?
Piers.
Well, and that's the other thing is the tension is really high because Lewis will go write something and send it out and Tolkien, you just wrote that just like that and sent it out, and he goes, yeah. What's wrong with that? Did you edit it? Well, of course I edited it. I mean, I thought about it and I read you guys a little bit of it. Remember? And he goes, yeah, it needed a lot more editing. And on the other side, Tolkien's doing this. Okay, so I wrote the first part of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and sent parts of it to my son during the First War. Right, and it's the 30s, right? By the time we actually get to the first book, where I think profanity was involved between Lewis and Tolkien, where Lewis said, if you don't get that book done, I am going to kill you. And if you don't send it out now, I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to send the manuscript out as it is after I've killed you, which probably caused him to actually do something with it. And it really is. It was that kind of fight between the two of them as friends, where they were really opposites in that way too.
Yeah, or even in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where Lewis decides he'll throw in Father Christmas, right? Like Tolkien just really you build this gorgeous other world of talking animals, and you think out some of the difficulty. And Lewis had been working on talking animal universes since he was a kid. Like we got Lewis Juvenilia, where he invents this land of Boxen. And he tells these stories about these frog people and stuff, and it's all wonderful. So he's been pondering it, but Tolkien is just thinking, so you got this wonderful little talking animal universe, and Santa Claus is in it. Like, how does that even make sense? How
It's like
would
a
you-
badly decorated Christmas tree, right? You've got
Right.
all these ornaments. You don't know where they're exactly from. You're like,
Yeah.
what is that? Is that?
So do we need an apology for Lewis? I mean, I mean, at least at first blush, I've got to think that something's going on here. That he sees the way that Christ crowns paganism and is the fulfillment
Yeah.
of paganism. And I mean, even the last battle where who's the Calorman who had been worshiping Tash but really had been loving Aslan all along. I mean, so there's this sense there of all this rich mythology going all the way back. These are fumblings in the dark, and so of course Santa Claus shows up because
Of course he's coming to town. I mean,
yeah.
Well, and in that way, yeah, and in that way, Lewis is more like the literature. Lewis is imitating the literature that he studies,
Yeah.
and so Tolkien is a language man, and he is inventing his stories after years of building new languages. And Lewis is a literature man, and all the poets that he reads and cares about have done exactly the
Yeah.
same thing. Milton has this poem about the morning of Christ's nativity, and then all of a sudden all of the mythological creatures from the Greco-Roman world are sifted according to whether or not they bow down before the baby Jesus or not. And in his opening books of Paradise Lost, you find out that all of the false gods are just names that people have called the demons by for centuries,
Yeah.
right? And you get this just constant sorting. Spencer does it too. I mean, so does Dante.
Yeah.
But there's a kind of a Renaissance commitment to sorting through the literary tradition and kind of positioning these figures that have populated the imagination beforehand. And now you're saying, whose team are you on? Can Pan, this god who is sometimes associated with terrible revelry, could he be on the good side?
Lewis says,
Lewis
yes,
says,
I'll throw him in line as
he
Georgia
comes
too.
along too.
The way you describe the morning of Christ's nativity with the pagan gods or pagan characters being around the nativity in some way, it makes me think of nativity scenes in households with small children, where with these bizarre things like there's baby Jesus
Mickey Mouse.
and Mickey Mouse is at the
Or
cradle.
the Lego.
Right, yeah. And the
Nativity.
Lego people are bringing gifts, and there's a centaur and an astronaut.
Yeah.
Which is
All the different realms of reality are
well,
coming
right,
to Christ.
exactly. Which is crazy, but also sort of a 4-year-old's sense that this one they worship at Christmas is of course the one that all the realms of the reality would gather around.
Yeah, he's the god of the
course.
Legos. He's the
I mean,
god
anything
of
I know
Star
that's
Wars.
anything I know that's got to be real. Of course, my imaginary friend is asking Jesus into their heart. Like that there's just a rightness.
Yeah. And there is that scene in the last battle where, as they're kind of making their way towards the middle, further up and further in, but they see the ridges that are the other worlds, and like they can see England from here, and the people in England are all moving towards the middle. And I'm sure they can look over and see, the Legos too. Right? They can see from their Narnia ridge, they can see the other ones all converging towards
I think there was even a Broncos fan somewhere.
even the Broncos.
You might be the only one, though. I mean, that's.
Is that a way of honoring those stories and those worlds even more richly than they honor themselves by not having the boundaries? So if we do have these boundaries, as long as we're in our world, ours is real, but the others have no place. Or at least in our thought, if not in reality. But Lewis seems to say, hey, all these boundaries are porous, and they're all. It's a way of saying they're just as real, even if we've misunderstood them all along. They're just as real as everything else we're interacting with, and therefore I'm going to honor it. So it's this combination of they're real, and we probably misunderstood it, and we're going to pull it all together now under the Lordship of Christ. That's just a really rich way of thinking about what he was doing with these other worlds.
Yeah.
Which in that he would be, that would be a place where he and Tolkien would really meet. I think in as far as in conviction, this insistence that the secondary worlds that are being created can be hallowed. That's something they agree on, even if Tolkien's going to say what you're making is threatening not to be a world by the way you're populating it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
World between the worlds.
if we're talking about subcreation, which is it's a Tolkien word, right?
Right.
That really nods to the integrity of you are created and then you create something. It nods to the integrity of that created world, and so he has that strategy. Like, okay, if I'm created in the image of the Creator, I should make something that's really got as much integrity as the universe itself, insofar as I have that power and I am Tolkien. So he goes for it. And Lewis has another strategy, which maybe emphasizes the unity of all truth, that spans all the subcreations. Lewis seems to be adopting kind of a medieval intellectual strategy, which is, in the Middle Ages, you didn't so much win an argument by refuting your opponent. I mean, maybe in the late Middle Ages, in a certain form of scholasticism, you didn't prove them wrong, take them apart, and then say, okay, now let's look around and see if I've got anything true. You actually said, no, I've got something so true, I'm going to situate your little truth inside of mine, right? I'm gonna sketch out such a view of reality that yours can tidily be put into its proper place within a grand synthesis. And so Lewis is kind of going for that, without getting too big for his britches. He's saying, oh, I think I can explain how all of these go together within the umbrella of the truth as it is in Christ.
Comprehension also seems to fit. So synthesis could be a word for it, but it's also my account is comprehensive. It understands what you've said, but it understands what you've said as being a part of a larger understanding.
Which to work at all and to have the appropriate kind of humility that befits Christians, it's got to be a really patient exercise, I think. So that's, I'd wonder what Tolkien would say about Lewis there. I mean, Lewis knew enough, but it's, if I understand your thoughts better than you do yourself, I sure better have spent a long time unfolding your thought, understanding the internal logic of it, rather than, oh, but what you really mean is this. I know,
Sure.
I think there are quick ways that Christians might want to do this that show none of the signs of the kind of thoughtful comprehension that Lewis would want to have.
Yeah, I do think probably Lewis's fulfilling promises he made to his child self is something like, he's always loved talking animals, and one of his earlier poems is, I can't remember the name of it, it's like something about how he refuses to repent of loving talking animal stories, right? Like I know that's silly and I'm supposed to have outgrown it, but come on, Badger and Moley, give me a break. That's, like, you can't, like, you can't not like those guys. And the Narnia project is kind of this, I think even the talking animals are going to get saved. Like, what would it take for talking animals to come to Jesus? And he gets this sort of Aslan answer.
You got a question?
Oh, yeah.
We had Thai food with him about a month ago. It was really yummy.
But did you read the book?
Oh, for the recording, the question is about Michael Ward's Planet Narnia project, I guess. Yeah. So I'll just say I find it really convincing. Maybe not in the details. I like how Ward seems to have the idea that as you get further out into some of the details, you're going to have to kind of play along and try some stuff. Like, well, I kind of think Neptune's a little like this.
And Venus, here's the things that we can do with Venus.
Yeah. But I do think the way he argues the book, it's in danger of sounding like a conspiracy theory, right? Oh, the secret is that behind the 7 Narnia books are the 7 classical planets, and this gives the secret shape and feel and sensibility to each of them and explains their difference. So he does a couple things I like. He makes fun of other people's 7-fold schemas to prove that he has some critical sensibility, right? Like, well, so then there's a guy who thought it was the 7 sacraments of the medieval Catholic Church. Can't prove that. And he goes through other 7s that are kind of silly. And he says, in fact, I was so skeptical that you could do some 7-fold explanation that I had quit looking altogether. But then he goes to Lewis's stated views in other places, where Lewis has a poem about the 7 classical planets that really lays things out. He's got some statements in his letters and essays where he says, there is great apologetic value for the Christian worldview in understanding what the medievals were doing with how they thought about these 7 planets. And then I think there are enough definite hits in the chapters on the different books that I think Ward's nailed something here.
Which has to do with the way that Lewis has done the patient learning of the tradition for so long that he's ready to harness it. In the years, the 52, 53, he was writing his tome on 16th century English literature, which Lewis refused, sort of against the trends in literary studies. Lewis basically says that the 16th century literature is not a new thing. It is connected to the medieval world which has preceded it. So even as he zooms in on Renaissance literature, he's not going to focus on it as a new thing. He's hearing its harnessed witness. So not surprising that it would be even a moment where he's able to bring about that kind of synthesis.
And you're probably seeing that on the fact that the medieval cosmology is scientifically debunked by the Renaissance, by the authors Lewis is interacting with.
Right, but that he is not just listening to them as debunkers, he is hearing the whole tradition.
So Oxford won't give him a chair. When he finally gets a chair at Cambridge, it's a chair that they invent called the chair in medieval and Renaissance literature.
Which have never been a chair like that one before, right?
Right, that's not a thing. Right? Medieval and Renaissance, those are different periods. But Lewis says, nope, that's the point, that they're not different periods. The big difference between people is not, oh, the Middle Ages is so different from the Renaissance. He actually says Renaissance, rebirth, that's actually a little bit of humanist propaganda. To say that everything died in the Middle Ages and was reborn when finally secular learning came back. So he said, let's reject the secular propaganda, bind the Renaissance period, including the Reformation period, to the medieval period with the word and, right? Medieval and Renaissance literature, and admit that the big dividing line in human history and thought is sort of around Jane Austen, right? I'm more like people just after Jane Austen, right? And from Jane Austen all the way back to Homer is more like one thing. Well, that's kind of a out there claim, and I think using Jane Austen with it is kind of a joke, right? It makes it sound like Jane Austen changed the universe.
Some of our students are pretty convinced.
With her
Jane
6
Austen-
novels in which almost nothing happens.
Hey, there is lots of talking and thinking and walking and then talking.
No, I'm a
Very
Jane Austen
friend.
fan. I'm just saying.
Courtship and tea.
Yeah, it's funny to treat
That's
them as
something.
kind of the dividing line in human history because it's a handful of them, and they are what should you say they're carved on little 2-inch bits of ivory.
Yeah.
Right.
Were we looking at the passage?
Yes.
Should we do that? It seems like it would be a nice time to do.
So this is just all the setup. This is just to write books. So if you want to write a children's novel, you have to actually have all of that background, medieval and Renaissance literature, to actually do that.
Yeah.
Step 1: read everything in the Bodleian Library.
Right. Step 2: write a children's book.
All right. Let's see, Melissa, you picked this passage. How do you want to
Yeah.
set it up and then?
Oh, sure.
It's a lot of text on the screen. Like if you read how to do PowerPoints and Prezis and visual presentations.
Right.
The first rule is never do this, but.
We are
We're all
rule
friends here.
breakers here.
Yeah, we're all
So,
friends here.
so the setup is, as you saw on the outline, when the children and Jadis and Uncle Andrew arrive in Narnia, it's totally dark. They know there's something beneath their feet, but they don't know what it is. And they start to hear singing. And as the song continues, light is born, and the lion creator who is singing Narnia into life does so and is joined by the stars that he has sung alive already. And eventually he sings land and terrain and vegetation and then creatures. And eventually after that is this scene where the creatures have all been born now, and they're gathered. And they're gathered, and Aslan does something. So that's the scene. Dude, we want it read aloud?
Yeah.
I think so. Do you?
Okay.
You can either
Oh, I could.
turn-
Oh, I can open to the. I'm like,
what
but
is-
my neck is gonna get sore.
What's that technology you're holding?
Perfect. Okay.
Oh, it's a book.
All right. But though Diggory could no longer hear the lion, he could see it. Real quick, the reason he can't hear is because there's so much cawing, cooing, crowing, braying, neighing, baying, barking, lowing, bleating, and trumpeting. And so now Aslan has created creatures who are making noise too. Though Diggory could not hear the lion, he could see it. It was so big and so bright that he could not take his eyes off it. The other animals did not appear to be afraid of it. Indeed, at that very moment, Diggory heard the sound of hoofs from behind. A second later, the old cab horse trotted past him and joined the other beast. This is one of the creatures from London who has now been brought into Narnia. In parentheses, the air had apparently suited the cab horse as well as it had suited Uncle Andrew. He no longer looked like the poor old slave he had been in London. He was picking up his feet and holding his head erect. And now, for the first time, the lion was quite silent. He was going to and fro among the animals, and every now and then he would go up to 2 of them, always 2 at a time, and touch their noses with his. He would touch 2 beavers among all the beavers, 2 leopards among all the leopards, 1 stag and 1 deer among all the deer, and leave the rest. Some sorts of animal he passed over altogether, but the pairs which he had touched instantly left to their own kinds and followed him. At last he stood still, and all the creatures whom he had touched came and stood in a wide circle around him. The others whom he had not touched began to wander away. Their noises faded gradually into the distance. The chosen beasts who remained were now utterly silent, all with their eyes fixed intently upon the lion. The cat-like ones gave an occasional twitch of the tail, but otherwise all were still. For the first time that day there was complete silence, except for the noise of running water. Diggory's heart beat wildly. He knew something very solemn was going to be done. He had not forgotten about his mother, but he knew jolly well that even for her he couldn't interrupt a thing like this. The lion, whose eyes never blinked, stared at the animals as hard as if he was going to burn them up with his mere stare. And gradually, a change came over them. The smaller ones, the rabbits, moles, and such like, grew a good deal larger. The very big ones, you noticed it most with the elephants, grew a little smaller. Many animals sat up on their hind legs. Most put their heads on one side as if they were trying very hard to understand. The lion opened his mouth, but no sound came from it. He was breathing out a long, warm breath. It seemed to sway all the beasts as the wind sways a line of trees. Far overhead, from beyond the veil of blue sky which hid them, the stars sang again, a pure, cold, difficult music. Then there came a swift flash like fire, but it burnt nobody, either from the sky or from the lion itself, and every drop of blood tingled in the children's bodies, and the deepest, wildest voice they had ever heard was saying, "Narnia, Narnia, Narnia, awake, love, think, speak, be walking trees, be talking beasts, be divine waters."
That creation story for Narnia is so good that I've actually gotten into arguments with students about whether it's better than Genesis. And not so much better than Genesis, like, take the Bible, I want Narnia, but I've actually had students say, yeah, and Aslan sings the world into being just like God does in Genesis. And as a kind of a textual purist, I have to say, yeah, I don't know the Hebrew word for sing, but it's not in Genesis, right? It's not in Genesis 1. So let's admit that God doesn't sing. God is not said to sing the world into being in the Bible's creation story. And students would push back, but he does, really, right? I mean, if you hold the text sideways and look at it squinty-like, I mean,
They really want you to say yes, right? They're like,
yeah.
please just
They're
say
kind of
yes.
wanting permission, right?
Yeah.
But I can say he sings it, right? Like Iluvatar does in the Silmarillion, right? Like Lewis and Tolkien can't both be wrong. And I want to say, like, they're not wrong and they're not better than the Bible. But what is going on there with the sense of, I don't want to say disappointment with the Bible, but the sense that they've heard something so magical in the singing of creation that there's something more prosaic about what they know to be the truth from the opening of the scriptures.
Yeah, I think they're disappointed that God only speaks in the Bible, only speaks things into being rather than sings them. And I think what that does is surfaces the impoverished sense we have of what God's speech does. And so what I like about Lewis here is I think it's an invitation for us to actually eventually come back and be disappointed with Aslan's singing, because we know how much richer divine speech is in Genesis. So I think it's his way of saying, oh, I don't know quite how that would have worked or what that would have been like, but I know his speaking is so grand and beautiful and effective and musical that let me try with Aslan's singing and things popping into existence. And maybe that gets at something of what happens when the word proceeds from the mouth of God. That it's that living, it's that dynamic. In fact, it's so much so that the word eventually kind of needs to become flesh and dwell among us personally. That it's this kind of word, this kind of speech that is so radically different from the way we normally think of our speaking.
I've got a rejoinder for you.
Okay, rejoin.
All right. So Fred's already brought up there are plenty of details we wish Genesis would incorporate in its account of creation, because then we'd be much more satisfied with how all these things work together. Like, when eventually the kids marry. Well, where do these women come from? And then the serpent, it talks. Really? Cool. Do the other animals talk? And questions like that. But it's a highly crafted story, preparing for the way that the history of Israel takes place over the next 5 books in the Pentateuch. Specifically, the way that God speaks the world into being, and the world obeys by coming into being, sets up the pattern for God speaks, creation obeys. God speaks the law, and we as his people obey it. So there's a speak and obey revolving around preparing us for the Torah. That's one way of it. So Genesis is a highly crafted piece of literature in addition to being a whole bunch of other things.
So if you're asking, why does it make sense for me to obey when the Lord speaks? The answer is something like, the dirt you're standing on and the air you're breathing, obey when God speaks.
God speaking and us obeying is woven into the fabric of creation. But there's a lot more going on in creation than just God speaking and us obeying. So for example, all of creation is singing and worshiping. So if Genesis had been written with worship in mind a little more than God speaking and us obeying his law, it could have told the story of the word in terms of a musical word. So where does all this worship come from in creation? Is all of creation, the stars and everything are doing their worship? Well, it comes from the God who sang their song into being, and it could have used the same sort of rich language. So I don't know if I'd want to take word and make it so powerful that it swallows up song within its meaning. I might want to just leave them as parallel ways of portraying it. One, thinking primarily in terms of law and obedience, revolving around the ruler who speaks law. And the other one being a creator who sings into creation something which then sings him back to himself. So leave them as just standing parallel ways.
Well, yeah, so I mean, I love what you're, Adam, I love both those things that you're doing, and I particularly love the tie-in to law and obedience.
As John Salehammer wrote a book on Pentateuch. Anyway,
But we,
footnote.
I think but we'd have to work a long time to get to the dynamism and the richness and the liveliness of law, so that it's the kind of thing that the psalmist can praise in Psalm 119. So I mean, it's there, but it's, I mean, because part of what happens in God's words, from which creation springs forth, I mean, it's so profoundly effective. So it's not something that just hangs out there and waits on response. And actually, that's the place where I'd want to put a little caveat with, where creation's distinct from everything else that happens, is that this is something that simply doesn't, it's actually not obedience. So when God creates, it's not the creatures obey themselves into being. They are unilaterally created through the divine word. From that point on, their history is one of call and response, command and obedience or disobedience. But actually, this is a kind of a one-off event where God simply speaks and things are. So I think I'd want to make sure that this is a unique kind of word that carries within itself both the initiative and the response. That is, just in uttering it,
And
God makes stuff.
I'd say yay and do the same thing with song. So it's a unique kind of, yeah.
Can I jump in? So what I notice about what Lewis ends up doing, so Aslan's singing, the stars end up they are the ones that keep singing. So they imitate his song, but he sings and sings all sorts of things into being, and then his own song gets swallowed up in the sounds of noisy creatures. Creatures make noise, and it's not song noise, but it's also not speaking noise. And then what Lewis does, so he separates this sort of nonverbal sound making, and then the scene that we just read starts with silence, and then Aslan, instead of singing, starts touching and breathing and speaking. He starts taking 2 by 2. He touches their noses, and so in that way he's being animal-like, which is, I don't know, quite precious, this intimate but feline activity of his. And then he takes them and he he breathes, but he has some sort of fire in his power, and he has his breath, and he starts to dignify them so that then instead of being braying, calling, cooing, which is also great and dignified and validated, they become speaking animals. So here it seems like Lewis is building up an account of speech in part by its differentiation from other kinds of sound. And I ended up thinking in this reread that speaking, I actually think Lewis might, even though we love the fact that Aslan sings, I think speech might be elevated by the end of this chapter. That
above singing?
Above song in some sense. I don't want to put much stock in that, but there's a way in which you're not wishing Aslan kept singing anymore. The fantastic thing is that he's now speaking deepest, wildest voice they ever heard, and they hear his words, and his words are calling forth words from his creatures.
Well,
And then the next whole chapter focuses on what the possibilities of speech unfold.
That makes sense because, for one thing, Lewis is doing a deep meditation on talking animals here. It seems like an unworthy subject to turn that mind loose on, but that's he's really deeply, like he owes something to his 5-year-old self, and he's going to really have to think through this talking animal thing very profoundly. Secondly, he's not trying to create an alternative to Genesis, right? He's actually exegeting, he's commenting on Genesis and trying to get to the meaning of it. So it makes sense that he would use music, not explicitly talked about in that part of Genesis, to get you to this understanding of the word. And then also, part of that mystery of the talking animals is that it's the word of Aslan that makes them understand his word and brings them into speech. There's a line in a George MacDonald story. It's in Back of the North Wind. There's one of those long, strange poems in George MacDonald's Back of the North Wind that says, it's a lullaby, and the singer says to the baby, "Where did you get that little ear?" And the response from the baby is, "God spoke, and it came out to hear."
Yeah.
Right? And there's this idea that, like, yeah, that's what ears are for. I mean, why would you need ears if God weren't talking?
Fred, I just say, I mean, it's not just the word of it's the word, the touch, the breath, and the fire of Aslan that allow them to hear. I mean, it was lots of rhyming of creation and Pentecost too. I mean, so the way that God breathes His Spirit into the first couple, the way that in Pentecost the Spirit comes in a flash of fire. So I mean, I think it's all of that together.
It also, just to show how it's recapitulating even more scripture, it has the obvious, the 2x2 of a Noah preservation, and then it also feels like the calling of the disciples. Because it would say, the pairs which he touched instantly left their own kinds and followed him. So there's a calling of disciples and
Doctrine of election, carefully leaving out a doctrine of rejection. Right? The other animals, he doesn't say, "Not you." They just wander away. And that sounds like Lewis. Based on his more
go.
Well, but then I critique myself. So I'm wrong.
Go!
Well, I was just thinking.
You're large, you contain multitudes.
But I just tamed myself as the problem.
Large this way, not.
So, working on it. Well, I was just thinking that so many things in the history of salvation are woven into that prior to the fall. So that just got me wondering if creation was so rich a thing that it already contained in itself all the steps of the order of salvation somehow, so that the order of salvation isn't a new thing after creation. I never thought
It's already structurally
I
in
never
there.
thought how strongly recreation was connected to creation until that pushed me that way to think recreation is just going back through the steps maybe. Now there isn't enough in the scriptural account of creation to say that, but just so much of the story of salvation was contained within that story of creation that it made me wonder how much recreation was patterned after creation.
It's such a mix too, because I mean, I think there's a sense in which in Genesis, so the garden is where God walks with his human creation. So in the one sense, this is the goal of all of Scripture, the dwelling with God, dwelling in God's presence. And yet there's also such a strong sense that Adam and Eve are set in the garden to tend it, and then there to have these children, and there to expand across the earth so that the glory of God covers the earth, and the whole of creation becomes a place in which God dwells with his people. So I mean, you get this sort of already accomplished sense in creation, even in the garden, where God's living with his people. And you get this call forward to make the whole earth the garden, and we see that in Revelation 2. It seems like the project's done, and the project is good.
I just grabbed the visual steering wheel and moved us to Uncle Andrew and his misuse of the goodness. So we can keep talking. I just want you to know that the audience is watching another thing happen. I didn't mean to cut us off.
We can even transition to that. One of the things that the book ends up unfolding is that Uncle Andrew witnessed the exact same scene. He's further away. And he has been also experiencing the creation of Narnia and the dignifying of the creatures as Aslan selects them and breathes on them. Uncle Andrew thinks that ferocious animals are gathering together basically as a threat to him. So he can't hear what's happening. And the speaking animals eventually start to address him, and Uncle Andrew can't even understand that they are talking to him in his own speech.
And they're asking him if he needs food or what he wants or something like that.
Yeah.
They're throwing chestnuts at him, and they're throwing.
And he thinks that they're attacking him.
Some really good thistles.
I know, that's right.
Those were good too.
Yeah. The bulldog asks in his business-like way, "Now, sir, are you an animal, vegetable, or mineral?" That was what it really said. But all Uncle Andrew heard was, "Growl."
What does he hear the voice of Aslan? What's he think when he
No,
hears
he's
that?
not able to hear the voice of Aslan.
Aslan explains that.
It says when the lion. So this is in the same place. When the lion had first begun singing long ago, when it was still quite dark, he had realized that the noise was a song, and he had disliked the song very much. So he understood something at first. It made him think and feel things he didn't want to think and feel. Then when the sun rose and he saw that the singer was a lion, only a lion, as he said to himself, he tried his hardest to make believe that it wasn't singing and never had been singing, only roaring as any lion might in a zoo in our own world. Of course it can't really have been singing, he thought. I must have imagined it. I've been letting my nerves get out of order. Who ever heard of a lion singing? And the longer and more beautiful the lion sang, the harder Uncle Andrew tried to make himself believe that he could hear nothing but roaring. Now the trouble about trying to make yourself stupider than you really are is that you very often succeed. Uncle Andrew did. He soon did hear nothing but roaring in Aslan's song. Soon he couldn't have heard anything else even if he'd wanted to. And when at last the lion spoke and said, "Narnia, awake," he didn't hear any words more of his song.
Later, Aslan explains this to Polly and Diggory. He says, it's when what Andrew does discover, what Uncle Andrew does discover is that the earth, the ground, will kind of grow anything. And his coins by mistake have fallen into the ground. And so then there's this gold tree and a silver tree, and he starts to think about this new young world. He thinks about it commercially. He thinks, how could I make this for my profit? Aslan later explains, he thinks, "Great folly, child. This world is bursting with life for these few days, because the song with which I called it into life still hangs in the air and rumbles in the ground. It will not be so for long." And this is Aslan's explanation, "But I cannot tell that to this old sinner, and I cannot comfort him either. He has made himself unable to hear my voice." That's Aslan's account. "If I spoke to him, he would only hear growlings and roarings. Oh, Adam's sons, how cleverly you defend yourselves against all that might do you good."
But the defense is by means of make-believe, precisely the thing which just blows our minds and takes us into the gospel deeper. So you have this parallel to what you did with curiosity in the world of make-believe. It shelters him but opens us. Kind of
And then he makes believe that the lion's not singing even though he's just heard it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now that idea that, what's he think he can plant and grow battleships? You remember
I know,
that?
right?
He thinks, man, okay,
Steam
so I know
engines.
I got the rings, I know how to get here. Anything you plant grows into more of itself. Wow, I'm going to be a billionaire. I can take over the world. Forget having a lot of money. I can conquer the world.
But first I'll need to kill that lion.
I'll come back with a gun. I'll have to kill that lion, yeah. Yeah. That gets us pretty deep into Uncle Andrew's mind, which is not a nice place to be. Diggory has a moment where he realizes he could become Uncle Andrew, right? Where he realizes that whole mindset is not like, oh, that evil character over there, but is actually who he could become. We wanted to kind of land here as our last major point because Lewis is doing several things here. There's a critique of the misuse of technology, I think, not just of technology, but of its misuse. I have to push a button here to keep
Okay.
the screen from shutting down.
Right. So one of the early setup for why are these children becoming friends with each other is Diggory and his dying mother are living with now this uncle and aunt, a sibling set. As presumably Diggory's mother is in a kind of hospice care, as it were. And Diggory overhears after his first visit to, now I think it's just to Charn, he hasn't yet been to Narnia, he overhears a woman saying to his aunt, oh, it's so terrible, Diggory's mother can't even eat anymore. I don't think anything really will help her other than fruit from the land of youth. Nothing in this world will do. And so Diggory hears this, and he knows that language of fruit from the land of youth, he knows that wasn't actually meant as a real reference, except for now he knows there are other worlds. And
That has fruit.
Right, that have fruit. And so now when he returns eventually to Narnia, this fruit from this garden that he knows will be a shelter and protection, I think and Jadis, the witch, does tell him, it will make you live forever. And then Jadis somehow knows and says, it will make your mother live forever. So that's, so the abuse of a thing, he knows that he doesn't quite know what it's for, but it has a word about it. He's been told by its poem about the tree, you can't use this except unless you're bidden to take the fruit. And he knows that the only command he has for the fruit is to bring it to Aslan. But
and you're to use it for someone else. And so he
Yeah.
kind of thinks to himself, it's my mom.
Oh, yeah.
And we've already seen a temptation of Diggory early in the book, right? When he sees the bell and reads the poem and shoves Polly and is quite a beast. And can self-justify pretty quickly, like, well, no, I was just doing what the poem said, and it didn't
Yeah.
tell me not to. And
We driven mad either, right?
yeah, so if you were watching his character and thinking about his track record, you wouldn't think, I trust that guy's character, he's going to do right. You actually think, oh no, first the bell, now this.
Right, and so Aslan, once Diggory returns with the fruit, he sort of acknowledges to Diggory, you thought about doing something else too, right? You had a tempter inviting you to take the fruit for your mother. And Diggory says, yes. And Aslan says, it would have actually made her live. It would have healed her, but not for your joy. I get you talking that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two things that are really poignant about this temptation. One is that Diggory is tempted to do it for someone else. I mean, this is not just mere, Uncle Andrew is a lightweight. He just wants to make money, whatever. Diggory wants to save his mom. So, I mean, that's particularly poignant. And the second is, along with what Melissa just said, there's a line somewhere in there that says, no, people always get what they want, they just don't necessarily like it. So Jadis does, she eats from the fruit, and she is going to live long, but she's not going to like it. And so it's pointed there because it's not simply that, well, you're going to do the wrong thing and it's all going to fail and you're not going to get what you want anyway, so forget about it. It's, wow, you could be having someone else in mind, and you could succeed in that which you're attempting. It's just not, you just may not like it, And so, I mean, I think it's a really deep and subtle temptation that happens. I mean, and there it sort of rhymes so well with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Did Adam and Eve get what they wanted? Absolutely. Did they like it? Absolutely not.
That fits the deep kind of logic in The Lion and the Witch, where yes, everything always will work according to its nature, and that's just as true for Aslan as for anyone else. Things are set up in a certain way, and they will happen that way.
And I think that this is where you were talking about science, right, Fred? Is that there are going to be, and there are now, a desire that we all have when a family member is sick, and we want to get them good treatment. And what kind of scientific exploration are we willing to put up with to actually heal someone? Because it's a great thing. We want to see our parents, our grandparents, our friends get healed from illnesses that certainly are antithetical to the way in which ultimately they are supposed to be. But the thing is that we are doing interventionist work where we're not supposed to be intervening, right? You were talking about
Yeah, I
stem
was just
cell.
going to say, Lewis's own context, he's probably got in mind things like certain nuclear research. He thinks about vivisection a lot, the cutting up of living animals for research purposes, because of what we can know if we can see their organs functioning when we cut them open. He's against vivisection. He has philosophical arguments. He's got other things in mind technologically,
Right.
and he's got published views about the progress
Abolition
of
of Man
science.
talks about that.
Yeah. But so this month, people suffering from partial blindness, like focal blindness, where they can't see things, all they've got is peripheral vision, have been cured by flushing their eyes with stem cells. I mean, they have their sight back. Right? Now, where'd they get the stem cells? Well, they got them from fetuses. Okay. What happens if we start curing a lot of blindness by flushing eyes with stem cells? Well, we got a demand for fetal stem cells. You can kind of see where that's going, right? The principles he's dealing with are directly connected to the state of medical ethics now.
And you start saying, well, don't you want someone to see?
Absolutely.
That's all you have to start saying. Don't you want that? So you don't want that. Okay, you want them to stay blind. Oh, okay. All of a sudden, the rhetorical power of those arguments are things that you have to come face to face with, and that is a real difficulty. Or isn't there a guy that's now walking? Because they had some stem cell research done on him, and it healed part of his severed spine. And so, again, can you imagine the force of the argument? Don't you want that person to be able to walk? What are you going to say? No. I would rather they didn't walk at all. It is one of those questions that that implies a certain kind of answer where you have to say, well, it's more complex than that.
Yeah, we can heal lots of people, and we can become a society with a built-in demand for parts of fetuses. Now, there are ways to nice that up and keep us from ever having to see it, which is probably worse.
It's interesting that Diggory, when they're flying back from the garden, he's passed his test, made it through the temptation. He's quiet and sad, which I love that because it's a fittingly melancholic moment. I think not succumbing to the temptation to save your mom's life, if I can put it that way, shouldn't be a triumphal moment, even if it was the right thing to do. So he's quiet and he's sad, and he's not sure on the way back that even quite that it's the right thing. He just knows what Aslan told him to do, and he's comforted by the fact that Aslan knows best. I mean, there's something there, I think, too, about some of these, whether or not they're dilemmas. Maybe they're not ethical dilemmas, but they're surely emotional dilemmas. You could save someone's life,
Yeah.
and he takes refuge in the trustworthy voice of Aslan, even in the midst of a genuine sort of sadness and confusion about, I hope I did the right thing.
He takes refuge in something very specific, though. So he was very sad, and he wasn't even sure. Page 164. He wasn't even sure all the time that he had done the right thing. Well,
You guys didn't bring the same edition to class?
Oh,
I hate
son
it
of
when,
a
hate it
gun.
when that
Do you
happens.
want to learn?
I'll start that over. He was very sad, and he wasn't even sure all the time that he'd done the right thing. But whenever he remembered the shining tears in Aslan's eyes, he became sure. And that refers.
That's where I had my thumb. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And that refers back to page 144, where so what surprised Diggory as much as anything in his whole life, the tawny face was bent down near his own, and wonder of wonders, great shining tears stood in the lion's eyes. They were such big, bright tears compared with Diggory's own that for a moment he felt as if the lion must really be sorrier about his mother than he was himself. So there's this the pain of Christ or the pain of God, which transcends the situation or enters the situation, is deeper than his own. And that shapes sort of the ethical approach to it, where he's just like that, the tear, that's enough.
Did you want the next line too,
I
Melissa?
do. I mean, Aslan says, my son, grief is great. Oh, he says, I know, grief is great. Only you and I in this land know that yet. So there's this total confirmation, and I think what I connect to in part in that is that Narnia, the whole series, doesn't resolve the problem of death apart from everlasting life. So even though in this story he gets to bring some healing to his mother, she will die. And even the last battle, one of the sort of, I think, deeply difficult pieces of the story that we can gloss over because we're so happy to have forever Narnia, is that children die. Children die in the last battle to bring them into the further up and further in. And so, I'm just very aware Lewis doesn't, he neither diminishes or dismisses the great grief that drives us to look for cure, but he insists, I think, like all faithful human creatures need to do, that death is a certainty, that we are mortal creatures, and somehow if we will, and that is very grievous, and so those things all seem those things also they also seem relevant to governing our imagination and practice when we think about how we approach the desire for the good of relief and remedy to distressing realities like disease, sickness, and pain.
Just one more, going a little further back. Aslan says at one point, evil will come out of that evil, but it is still a long way off, and I will see to it that the worst falls upon myself. So that's the one other piece here. He doesn't solve this problem of evil, and he sees to it that the worst falls upon myself. I remember this time in grad school, I had just been reading a great classic book on the way God identifies us in Christ with our suffering, the way he takes our suffering upon himself in Christ and enters into it. And it was really stirring theology book. And there was a time of prayer, and I don't even remember the situation, but it was some very heavy, a parent who had just died, or some really acute kind of situation. And I remember in prayer for the first time, I felt such deep sympathy and grief and gratitude in the company of the God who suffers with us in Christ. It was such a profound thought that whatever else we do with suffering, if a God who doesn't remain aloof, but who takes, in fact, the worst suffering on himself, it's not a solution to suffering in that it doesn't undo the reality of suffering, but it's a profound response. Not an answer in the sense of it does away the problem, but it's a profound response to suffering.
And it just reminds us that this world isn't right yet. Right? There is something that needs fixing. There is something that resonates across not just believers, but everyone. Right? If you've ever been in a hospital, and I remember when my dad was really sick, and this family had lost a loved one, but they weren't believers, and the anguish that they had versus the anguish of just before that. There are some people, you get to know people when you're all hanging out in the ICU together and you start talking with one another. And I remember talking with this group of people who were believers, and the deaths were so different. Right? The death of this one person, it literally was night and day. The fracturing of the family, and just I've never heard a cry like this woman's, versus the singing that had happened before, and the praising of God in the passing of someone, showed this radical difference between an expectation, a longing for, a looking homeward, versus that was it. There is no more. I can't imagine why, if that's all you had, you wouldn't chase stem cells. I can't imagine if that's all you had, why you wouldn't wanting to be doing all of these, expensive treatments to elongate, and why ethical questions become moot.
I was thinking that what it seems like Uncle Andrew exemplifies, and so also does Jadis. So they're the sort of radical versions. They see either themselves as the end of everything, or so Jadis seems to think she is the center of the cosmos, and that's why she can speak the deplorable word to destroy all of the people of her civilization. She said that's because they were my subjects. What else are they for?
She is a great bad guy.
Yeah.
She is, you're like, all right.
And Uncle Andrew has been sending guinea pigs, and now he's willing to send a random child into an unknown. He does not know what's happening when they touch the rings, except for he suspects they're going into another world. He knows that it's beneath him to suffer the unknown possibilities, but he doesn't think it's problematic to send others. And in fact, both Jadis and Andrew say ours is a high and lonely destiny to resist the sort of narrative that everyone else has that there are boundaries to our action. Anyway, I was trying to think about, they seem to not contextualize any of their practices. It seems like the Christian has to say, we know things, and this is back to the beginning of our conversation, we know things about our origin, and we know things about our destination. And so somehow that must govern what we do with the worlds that we are in. And so it means that any desire we encounter for life eternal, we know that is because God created us for
Exactly.
communion with him forever, for communion with him and with one another forever. But we know that the way there is not medical. And, and the way there, whatever grief it causes us, the way there means that we will suffer mortality, and it will be the last enemy defeated, and God will, in fact, bring about the thing that he has intended from the beginning and has been making the case. But anyway, we have that beginning and that
Even Lazarus, right? Lazarus has died again, which I would have been a little mad. Like, I'm in heaven. God calls me back. Really, again. Okay, once was bad enough. All right, divine plan and all that, but there is that moment.
The subtitle of this book is A Fairy Tale for Adults. Is that right? Fairy Story for Adults. I think that was on the first image I put up.
Just this one, not the other.
That was what was on the cover page. Yeah. But anyway, it's in the genre of fairy tales, all of Narnia. And you could say, well, there's escapist fairy tales and then there's non-escapist fairy tales. But I'd rather say, I think the whole genre is escapist. I think it is necessarily escapist literature. And then I want to go inside of that and say, yeah, but it depends on how you escape. This is escapism to a world where there's death and there's suffering and the decisions you make have consequences. And I'd say, what happens in Narnia doesn't stay in Narnia. it follows you home. It's actually about this world and this life. So it's a funny kind of escapism. It really is getting to another world where the animals talk and impossible things happen. And you deal with real life situations in a different format, in a way that you can handle. And you see that all the time. The temptations are different and things like that. But when it really gets down to the bottom, it's, oh, wait, he's dealing with death like death. That's a weird fairy tale.
No, I'll never forget reading Voyage of the Dawn Treader with my son. At the time, I think he was 8 or 9. We're sitting there, and we get to the part where Reepicheep is going into Aslan's country, and I just start crying. And then, because he's going over in the cortical over the wave, and I'm like, and my son's crying, and I'm crying. We still talk about that. Remember that time? Yeah.
Cried about a mouse?
Yes. Yes, it was the right mouse, not the Mickey one.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about how Narnia has 2 beginnings.
Right.
How that's beautiful to think about the 2 beginnings of Narnia. It's also got 2 endings, right? There's the last battle, which is where everything is packed up and put away.
Yeah.
But there's also the ending where Reepicheep goes off to the end of the world.
Right.
Right, and gets there first, because for him it's a geographical way of getting to the end of the world.
Right.
But then when everyone gets to the chronological end of the world, there comes Reepicheep. They're all at the
He
end
greets
of Narnia.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when he goes over, when you're even sad when he goes over, you're not sad like, oh, now who knows where Reepicheep is ending up. There is this tearful celebration, right? It's like this is what he always has known. It's the child. It's the poem or poem song. I can't remember. Melissa, is it a poem?
It's
or
a
something?
it's a song
Prophecy.
his nurse Dryad sang to him.
Yeah,
Where
about
wind
this.
and waves grow sweet, where sky and waters meet. Doubt not, Reepicheep, there to find all you seek. There is the utter east.
I knew she could.
Paint that
Quote
on
that.
your wall.
It's a mural on my office wall that a friend painted for me.
I was leaning into that. So, but it is that.
I don't know
moment.
every song in all of the Narnia.
Oh yeah, you do.
chronicles.
Go ahead.
She does know all the Elvish in the Lord of the Rings.
I got the
Only
poem
the
about
high Elvish, though.
I got the poem about the bell tattooed on my arm. So.
But it is the sense that there is a joyous celebration there that even an 8-year-old and his father celebrate together and resonate in, and it doesn't take sophisticated medieval and Renaissance literature knowledge to actually see that God has put together a universe in such a way that we all participate at whichever level we are in terms of our intellectual powers.
I think it's really unworthy to do anything that would reduce the Narnia project to kind of a psychological insight into C.S. Lewis. However, and so while knowing that's a real danger, like, oh, I see why he did that, something I know from his life, I think it matters that C.S. Lewis lost his mother
Yep.
at a young age, and that the punchline of this book is you get to the end and say, oh, this Diggory kid we're following, he turns into the old, bookish, brainy philosopher guy who's stumbling around in his old mansion that other kids come into that aren't his own natural children, but that he's able to, and his name is Kirk, which means church, right? Like, and he's able to lead them into other worlds and teach them things, and by clear, rational thinking and all the things that would go with Professor Kirk. I think that matters. Not that Lewis is disguising himself as this character, but you really do get a very full accounting of kind of how the whole Narnia project goes together in Lewis.
I think it's part of what makes that Aslan crying with him scene more powerful is to think that as an adult, perhaps Lewis is able to think that that the good, godly God, that's awkward, that a good divine creature can call a boy who's losing his mother son and say grief is great. Perhaps words he was able to hear then, or perhaps words he was not able to receive as a child.
Because the death of his mother was not just the tragedy of death, but his world fell apart.
His father,
couldn't handle it. His brother couldn't handle it. Lewis became an atheist. Everyone had to live in different places. The family unit wasn't together. It was one big disaster.
I mean, he was shunted off right to school when he was living at the home before that, and when his mom left, his dad couldn't handle it.
I do think the sense of all the loose ends being tied together at the end of The Magician's Nephew. I mean, Lewis is tying together more loose ends than we're just seeing there narratively for the Narnia Chronicles. It's really paying off some old debts. Paul, do you want to MC us out of here?
Sure. So this is really an example of what we do all the time. It is a way in which we sort of traverse, like we did some science, we did some philosophy, we did a little theology, we did literature, we did history. I mean, it is the kind of thing that is an amazing intellectual community where not only do we think hard, we laugh hard, and we love each other, and we care deeply because we think that's what the intellectual life is about for Christians. We are committed to refining each other as friends, refining each other as colleagues, working with our students in such a way that they too can equip themselves for the kind of life that God has called them to. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that is because I don't know. That's not our job, right? We don't also, sort of read their future tea leaves, which would sound weird in a Christian school anyway. But what we do as we enter into a conversation about who they are in Christ. What does it mean for them to thrive? And Lewis is, in one sense, like, what, a godfather to the project, right? We think about the work that he's done, the intellectual rigor, and the love of the Lord that he shows in his life. And we think, yep, that's the kind of people that we want to be. We think of even the relationships that he has with people like the Inklings that drive the intellectual life, where they are refining each other in their conversations. And I can't say enough about my colleagues in terms of how they have created in me an intellectual growth that I would not have had were it not for the kind of fights and conversations that we have. So thanks for spending some time with us. We all got really excited and said, yeah, we'll come and do this because we want to hang out with each other and we enjoy being with you. So thanks and have a great time.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.